grassy hilltop that hides a wealth of waste. Man may think that he rules the world, but it would appear that nature has the last word. Hello and welcome to Environment and to this unusual site, which is literally an example of how nature eats up man's mess. This week we'll be finding out how bacteria here can clean up industrial wastelands, dealing with man-made pollution, but also catastrophic accidents. Nature, it would appear, has the power to push on through even the most dark conditions. Oil spills, volcanic eruptions, or fires that scorch and sterilise its soils. Nature always bites back. In Chernobyl, a reserve around the former nuclear power plant is home to new life, but not as we know it. In many of its endeavours, mankind makes a mess every day, creating new piles of rubbish or emitting harmful emissions. And while we're constantly trying to create technology to help erase our harmful footprint, all too often we overlook a helper that's alongside us all the time. It's nature. $3 billion tonnes. That's the amount of rubbish produced every year in the EU. Piles of waste that take time to disintegrate. But here at this treatment site in Normandy, they're using Mother Nature to speed up the process. These pools are filled with the liquid that comes off our rubbish, basins of bacteria that bubble and multiply, a sewer soup that is poured onto the garbage to gobble it up. A natural helper that the site's laboratory keeps a constant check on and is so far satisfied with.
If we have piles of rubbish that we don't do anything to, then it takes 10 or 20 years to disintegrate. Here we get there in 3.
Keeping them warm and well fed, bacteria can munch through a variety of pollutants, including petrol. At this part of the site, earth that has been subjected to oil spills or used as industrial wasteland also gets a bacterial cleansing.
We pile up the polluted soil and cover it with large tarpaulin sheets. We've put a system of pipes in place that allows the air to circulate and thus helps the bacteria we need to break down petrol to grow.
Within just a few years, these mounds of polluted soil are brought back to a greener glory. By 2020, the OECD estimates we could be generating 45% more waste than we did in 1995. Boosting bacteria may be one tool to keep fields green and prevent our world being submerged by rubbish. Well, when you look closely then, nature does have weapons to help it fight off any problem life can throw at it, whether it gets covered in oil up to a certain amount at least, or burnt to a crisp by forest fires. Nature eventually always bites back in one form or another.
It's the worst environmental disaster in US history. Between 400 and 700 million litres of crude oil spewed into the Gulf of Mexico from a BP well, devastating ecosystems along the Louisiana coast. Now, nature is slowly trying to patch up the human error.
It's incredibly thick.
But depending on the type of oil or the scale of the leak, it could take a very long time for the environment to recover. A quarter to a half of oil is thought to evaporate into the air. Certain components are decomposed by UV rays in a process known as photooxidation. A small amount of oil could also have dissolved into water or sunk as particles, and the rest may simply be dispersed by sea currents or surface air. Scientists believe the ocean will eventually get back into balance, but human intervention is still needed, as 30 to 60% of leaked oil is believed to stay in the environment. Another example where nature tries to regain its balance: forest fires, like the recent disaster in Russia. While some plants and animals disappear, other species take advantage of the new environment once the fire is put out. It can sometimes result in radical changes to local biodiversity. Michel Venetier is a scientist who's studying the degree of environmental changes caused by forest fires in the south of France.
The microorganisms and bacteria in the soil, as well as animals, are greatly affected by forest fires. If they occur too often, these organisms lose their capacity to resist. In general, we need at least 50 years between 2 fires in order for the ecosystem to completely regenerate.
Nature can still find its way through even under more extreme conditions. Volcanic lava scorches everything in its path, But there are always some pockets of life that survive the 300-degree heat and help give new life to the burnt soil. No human can survive a volcanic eruption, like in the ancient Roman town of Pompeii. There, thousands of people turned to ash in an instant, leaving no signs of human life, while nature, as always, quietly reclaimed the land.
Well, here, reeds and rushes are taking some toxicity out of polluted waters. So now we've seen how nature can recover from oil spills, fires or even volcanoes. But what about a nuclear accident? Well, we're going to cross to Chernobyl, where some scientists say that in the absence of man, nature is flourishing. But what kind of life is it? Let's join a group of tourists who are travelling to the site to see for themselves.
A silent journey to an unusual destination. These tourists are heading to Chernobyl. Around the reactor, there's a 30-kilometre zone under tight control. Not everyone can enter it. These men and women paid to go on this surprisingly popular visit.
2 years ago we had 500 visitors, last year it was 7,000 and this year even more. People expect snakes with 2 heads, strawberries as big as watermelons. When they come here they realise they've been lied to.
Chernobyl is arguably the worst nuclear power plant accident in history. On April 26, 1986, the disaster was caused by explosions in the reactor number 4. Hundreds of thousands of locals were evacuated, never to come back. Now, 24 years later, a large part of the surrounding area has been turned into a nature reserve, a haven for wildlife. That's precisely what impressed Antoine Bamas, who produced a film on this transformation.
In the former hotel that was for the Soviet apparatchiks, you now see birches growing and taking over buildings. And there's something really interesting there.
But the area remains highly radioactive.
54 millirengen.
Is that dangerous?
Extremely dangerous.
In some places, the levels are even 10,000 times higher than the usual. Some species, however, seem to live there freely, evidently not suffering from the radioactivity. A paradox scientists find fascinating. Several teams have been working on the question and coming up with different conclusions. For some experts, the animals have developed defense mechanisms. Others believe quite the opposite, saying the area is still very much contaminated and dangerous for all living beings.
Can affect the way in which the offspring, the quality of the offspring that are produced from such damaged sperm or eggs. But there can also be other effects, for example, the reduction in quality of sperm, the many dead sperm that we see is probably due to these mutations.
More studies need and will be conducted in the Chernobyl area. There's probably no better place to understand the real impact of radioactivity on living organisms.
Well, that brings us to the end of this week's show. A big thanks to everyone who worked on it, and notably René Kaplan, Valérie Labonne and Jung Shim. Thanks to you at home for having joined us. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you again next time.